Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and we have a very special guest today. His name is Aaron Poochigian, and he is, I hope I said that right, but this guy is a poet, a classic scholar, a translator. He lives and writes in New York City, and his many translations include Stung with Love, which is a translation of Sappho and Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Um, his works appeared in Financial Times, New York Review of Books, and he's got a new book out called Four Walks in Central Park, A Poetic Guide to the Park. And this guy's got quite a story, an ex-cocaine addict, and he found healing in Central Park. And so, Aaron, welcome to the show. I'm really anxious to hear about your story.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Well, I hope I didn't butcher your name too bad. I'm recovering from chemo not too long ago, and my brain's still a little scrambled, but we're gaining on it. We're doing well.
I'm sorry to hear about the chemo, but you seem to be recovering from it strongly. You're very vital and vivacious today.
Well, I appreciate that. I love the alliteration. I love working with writers. Anyways, Aaron, I always like to jump into, these bios are great, but they always are, most people are much richer than their bio or a bio might get so big that we're only going to be talking about some element. I always like to start our conversations off with kind of, what brought you here and your story of, your life's journey that took you to becoming a poet, first of all, and then finding Central Park and all of this. Why don't you give us a little walk down memory lane and tell us about how you came here?
I had a revelation when I was 18. I think about it as a religious experience. I was sitting out front of the ivy-covered building at my undergraduate institution, and I was reading a section on the classical world, the Greeks and the Romans. And there were the beginning lines of a poem by Virgil, the Aeneid. And I didn't know Latin at the time, but I sounded it out. Armo virum quecano, Troiae quid primus arboris. It all sounds that great. And I swear, the sky became brighter and the grass became greener. And I realized that I was supposed to be a poet, and I was supposed to learn ancient Greek and Latin so that I could learn, yes, all the sort of possibilities that poetry has to offer. And so I've known that I was going to be a poet or that I should be a poet since I was 18, and I've stuck to that. I've never really had a period when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And so I went on and studied ancient Greek and Latin and eventually earned a PhD in classics. But it was, yes, I have been a scholar and published articles, but the focus has always been on poetry. And then began the more difficult years in my life when I would have 1 year academic positions teaching at a university, knowing I was going to leave. I became very lonely. Eventually, I settled in New York City and established myself here and had some friends here. But there was always a sort of loneliness. And then slowly during COVID, when I was isolated in my apartment during lockdown, I needed something. I didn't need something. I looked for something that would give me something to look forward to. And I confess that I became addicted to cocaine that way. I took it originally just as a sort of performance enhancing drug and to give me something to do during lockdown. But it was like catnip to me. I succumbed to it thoroughly. Within a month, I was addicted to it. And then commenced the most unhealthy period of my life. I'm lucky that I didn't have a heart attack.
That's generally a young man's drug. And once you get over 30 or so, that's not really maybe conducive to health as much.
No, a wise friend told me that, yeah, you shouldn't do that drug, certainly past the age of 50, but I think even earlier because
Yeah, yeah.
the possibility of a heart attack is so high.
I'd like to take a step back quickly, just to kind of step into your shoes for a minute. The focus of the classics and poetry and all of these things in this modern world today. How is that? I mean, I didn't ever go to college, so I'm one of these crazy entrepreneur guys that just finds his way through life and starts things and figures things out. But I've always loved poetry, and I've written a little bit of poetry in my life, but it's
Oh,
a
good to hear.
powerful expression of thoughts and emotions, and yet you don't in the mainstream world, aside from maybe rap music or something, you're like, well, where does poetry show itself? There's still poetry books written and published, but in today's world of instant gratification and social media and all of these things, it's not, the focus on the arts is certainly not what it was at one point. How have you found that, with your teaching and even just the reception of all of these amazing concepts and works? I feel like these works are fading away sometimes because people aren't seeing them and reading them and recognizing them, but I don't know that to be true or not.
Um, yes, thank you. I mean, you asked the question about contemporary poetry and where it's at and where it's going. I think of poetry right now as being like an endangered species that's kept in a wilderness. It's kept in a wilderness preserve, and that
Yeah,
wilderness preserve is academia. And so there
yeah,
are English majors who study it, and then there are MFA programs that encourage the writing of it. But it's mostly confined to academia. And so my big crusade is to try to push poetry outside of academia and to get it in front of interested readers. I dream of America having a national poetry again, and national poets that
yes, exactly.
non-specialists are familiar with and whose work
Right.
non-specialists know. And so that's one of the reasons behind my book, Four Walks in Central Park. I wanted to show that poetry can do more than write intense little lyrics and can do more than be esoteric and limited to people in academia. And so it's a kind of outreach. I see the book as a kind of outreach to
Nice.
meld poetry and the tour guide. And yes, thus to reach out to the people who visit Central Park, for example, or people curious about Central Park, and to give them the experience of being in the park if they're not using it as a tour guide. Yeah, that the book serves as a surrogate for being in Central Park itself.
Well, and then I'll leave my interjections for this. I really want to hear your story, but this just connected me. Like I'm a guy that was really I love the classic rock and folk songs from the '60s, probably through the '90s, and they used to do these things called concept albums. A lot of the rock and roll bands that I really liked, and they would tell a story through a whole album and through songs, and it was all poetry, and it might be a science fiction concept or a romance or whatever the story was, but it was I kind of took your book as like a concept album where you told a story through these series of poems that could easily have been set to music. So and today, you've got these just rough and raw, short haikus almost, that are just almost, they just drive a point home, and there's like nothing to think about, you're not painting a picture, you're not creating an emotion, you're just like throwing a drum beat out there. So I'll let you go back to your thought about you're in this addiction, and you've realized that, this is an issue. You're in the middle of COVID, everybody's stuck in their houses, apartments. They're saying, don't go outside, don't do this, don't do that. Everything's don't. But then they also kind of said, well, it's okay to be way out in nature by yourself. And that was sort of like one of the few things that, some people were like, well, okay, I can go where people aren't.
Yeah. First, I love your analogy with the concept album. I love concept albums as well, like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon,
Oh,
or The
yeah.
Wall, or David
Yeah.
Bowie and the Spiders from Mars.
Oh,
I love the idea. I love that analogy of a book-length poem
yeah.
with a concept album. But yes, to get back to my story, I realized, well, when I was doing far too much cocaine, I realized that I would have to quit. And I was figuring out slowly ways that I could work toward recovery. One of them, I discovered that I tried all different kinds of meditation, but my mind was too hyperactive.
Yeah. It's not really a
Yes.
conducive drug for meditating.
To be good at it. And so I encountered something called Shinrin-yoku in Japanese, which means forest bathing. It's not just walking in the woods, but it's walking through the woods intentionally, taking in sensation after sensation, and sort of itemizing them and appreciating them singly in your
Yeah.
mind. I saw that as a kind of meditation that I could do. I also realized I would need to quit doing cocaine. Mostly it was creative. It was creative sterility that did it to me. I was isolated in my apartment. I mean, all I
Right.
saw was the four walls of my apartment and then whatever was at the corner deli. And so I needed to be able to learn again how to appreciate being alive, the
Got it.
sensations of being alive. And so, since I live in Manhattan in the East Village, there isn't much wilderness anywhere near me. There isn't any wilderness
Right.
anywhere
Yeah.
near me.
Manhattan's not
And
known
so I
for its
decided on
forest.
Central Park as a substitute for wilderness, where one is supposed to do Shinrin-yoku. And I saw the Central Park as a kind of concentrated nature,
Okay.
where you have many, many different species, more species than you'd normally find in a wilderness, more species of birds than you normally find in a wilderness, and also a greater variation of types of landscapes, whether they be rocky or there be water features or there are lawns. And so I started I required myself to go to Central Park. It's about 15 minutes from my apartment daily for at least 2 hours and to try to do
Are you
Shinrin-yoku.
walking,
I was
bicycling, driving? How are
um,
you?
walking and sitting.
Okay.
The tour itself is, yes, strolling, and strolling is a metaphor for taking it
I mean,
easy.
to get to
There's
Central
a
Park is what I'm talking about.
Oh, I take the
Oh, okay.
bus
Got it. All
up
right.
Third Avenue.
Fair
It take
enough.
about 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then, yes, in the park, I'd walk or I'd sit, I'd lean up against a tree trunk. And then I had a great book, which actually maps every single tree in Central
Wow.
Park.
Nice.
And yes, I was an aspiring naturalist, an aspiring botanist, and I slowly became more familiar with the trees and their personalities. Beech trees with their smooth bark, the sort of player piano bark of a birch tree,
Right.
and the various times at which, they would be green and then start turning in the fall to yellow or red. Good. And so I, yes, slowly became a better naturalist by spending that time in the park. And so I was very serious about the meditation of it. And at first wouldn't stop to jot down notes. But eventually the poet in me won out, and I would allow myself to stop and jot impressions. I eventually realized when I had enough of these impressions in verse that that I was onto a book length project. And I
Good.
realized also that I could set the book up in such a way that it would as the park was good for me and helping me with my recovery and helping me learn how to appreciate the world again, so I could provide that solace ideally to readers as well, by encouraging them through capturing the essence of various attractions in the park. I could entice them back into an appreciation for the world if that's what a reader was needing. And so that sort of gave me the structure for the book, where there is a docent or tour guide who is the know-it-all, who gives all the details about the park. And then there is the addressee, the you, who is the reader.
Right.
And has become isolated and cut off from anything outside of his work life. And so, yes, that gave me the structure, and I realized what I was doing, something that's common in classical poetry, in Greek and Latin poetry, isn't common today. It's called didactic poetry, poetry that teaches something. And so the book teaches details about the park, the history of the park, and even true crime stories about the park, as it also encourages the reader to appreciate sensory details coming in from or just anywhere in one's life.
Hi, this is Joe Grumbine, and I wanted to share an update. The platform that hosts this podcast has made some changes to the subscriber settings, and we have a number of subscriber-only episodes that we offer to the supporters. And for a minimum of $3 a month, we can get you signed up. And if you're already signed up and you're having some kind of trouble locating these episodes in the other platforms, I would say maybe the best answer is to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I'm sorry for the hassle. I don't have any way to make a change, but I'm very grateful for all the support. Thank you. No, that's amazing. And I received a copy of the book and have been able to read through some of it, but enough to where I see what you did. And I've never been to Central Park, and I feel like I've at least experienced it enough that says, I think when I do go one day, I will have a different appreciation for it than if I just walked in cold. And so even for me, I live in California, I've only been to New York a couple of times and, for specific purpose. So I know the next time I do go to New York, I'm going to make sure I find my way to Central Park and spend a minute walking through the park. Maybe I'll even bring your book with me. I think that it's a very interesting and special way of presenting a narrative like that. When you started to put your thoughts down, the park's kind of like an arboretum and a museum, and it's got a lot of elements to it that are much more than a park. You think of a park and it's like a playground and some trees and a lot of grass, but this is much more than that. Like you said, there's all these different features and water and buildings and stories and history to this thing that make it, more than just like a, children's playground park or a sports park or something like that. Was there something that when you first started writing these impressions that was really speaking to you as far as, the impact of this park?
At first, I was most drawn to the dense forest areas. In particular, there's the Hallett Nature Sanctuary, the North Woods, and the Ramble. In that I felt most outside of the grid of the city when I was in those dense forest areas. But I eventually, when I realized I was working on a book-length project, I realized that I would want to have contrast. If it was all the same tone, then the tours would become monotonous.
Right.
And so excuse me, um, I wanted to get the contrast in. And so, for example, the Hallett Nature Sanctuary, which feels like monasteries I've been to in the past,
Hmm.
is contrasted with the nearby Wollman Rink. Where there's roller skating, and in particular, I'm particularly fond. They do it on weekends. It's called Disco Oasis, and it's like a '70s disco party in the park.
Wow.
And so you move then from the solemn religious nature of the densely forested areas one moment,
Yeah, yeah, no, no worries.
the densely forested wooded areas to the contrast of this party space.
Right.
So it's like
Yeah, that's a
going from a
wild
sacred
contrast. Yeah.
space, yeah, a sacred space to a profane space. And Yeah, so I built in contrasts like that, and then I also built in the contemporary surface impressions one takes in the here and now with history of the park, including true crime. And so, for example, there is a city that used to a suburb called Seneca Village that was located in the northwest of the park. And when the park was originally planned and designed in the 1850s, there were inhabitants in the park and they had to be bought out with eminent domain. And so it's interesting to think that there were real houses, real homes in the
Ah,
park, and they then, yeah, were removed in order to make way for this artificial landscape. And I tried also to make that a part of the poem that we think about when a lot of people talk about the park as if it's nature, but it's
right,
highly artificial. A lot of rock had to be dynamited out, and the
right,
landscapes are planned. And so I tried to emphasize in the book it's nature as a man-made thing, an artificial
right.
thing. And so it's a kind of, yeah, artificial wonderland that imitates nature, but gives nature in a sort of greater concentration, if you will.
Well, and nature kind of fills in gaps, when as soon as man stops building, nature starts building. And so, as the work of man begins to decay or even is left alone for a while, nature finds its way through the cracks in the concrete and one little thing will pop up and the next thing you know, you got a little ecosystem.
I would since Oh, hello.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm here. Sorry, I left a
Okay.
pause there.
Oh, got it. And so I'm excited to be talking on yes, for a health
Yeah.
podcast. Um, in that my experience, yeah, with forest bathing in the park and the various restrictions on drug use I imposed as I was working on the park. The park I credit it with my recovery from the addiction. In that I specified that when I was in the park, I couldn't be high. And then also, when I started working on the book, I made it a specification, restriction for myself that I couldn't be high when I was writing about the park. And
Yeah.
eventually, the project became so exciting to me and took up so much of my time that my drug use was severely curtailed. And eventually, I just stopped entirely.
Wow, that's
And so,
beautiful. What a way to quit. It wasn't like you didn't have to turn it into a lesson of willpower. You created an environment where you were doing what you wanted and you just wanted that less.
yes, it was so healthy for me. Also, in terms of health, doctors talk about having a regular schedule
Hmm.
as a major component of that. And so when I was using, I had no schedule whatsoever. I would work
Right.
for 16, 20 hours straight, crash for a few hours, and then start all over again. But with my visits to the park, I had a regular schedule. I'd leave at 8 a.m. every day to go do my time in the park. And so it helped me, coaxed me back into a healthier schedule and just a
Nice.
healthier lifestyle in general. And then I started getting exercise again. And
Right.
eventually, I started spending time running in the park as well.
Nice.
And so it really has been the sort of fountain of recovery for me, Central Park.
That's beautiful. We have a nonprofit called Gardens of Hope, and we offer what we call therapeutic horticulture. And our garden's only a couple acres, but it's the same idea, really, is that nature makes everything that you do to be healthy work better. And even just being in it by itself, doing nothing will give you healing. But if you come for a purpose, it will enhance that purpose. And it sounds like the park is a perfect example of that. Is there like how many times over what period of time did you go to the park? Like you started in what year and when was the last time you were there? I should say.
Oh, I started going there about 4.5, 5 years ago, and I would
Okay.
go there daily. Yeah, for a few hours, and then sometimes I would stay longer. If the meditation was really grooving in me, if I really got into the zone. Um, and now I still go 3, 4, 5 times a week, but
Oh,
it's
nice.
gone. The park has gone from being a new friend to me
Right.
to being an old friend. Originally, it was a
Nice.
new friend full of surprises, and I was discovering all of its different moods and possibilities. Now it's an old friend, and that I've seen the leaves change color
Right.
over a number of years now. But I do think the park is like bottomless, is
Yeah, yeah.
infinite. That there's still
No,
more for me to learn, and I still need to get better at identifying birds, for example.
yeah. No, I tell people I walk around my property every single day, and every single day I see something new. And I've been here for 30 years. And nature's just got that ability to reveal some little surprise every day, whether it's an animal I haven't seen, or a plant that pops up, or a mushroom, or, the stream did a little something different, or whatever. There's always something where you're like, oh, wow, I never saw that before.
I'm jealous that you have a property to survey. I live in a very tiny apartment in the East Village, but I was excited to hear about your nonprofit,
Yeah,
in that here and there, peppered throughout the very densely populated East Village with its small apartments, there are community gardens.
I love it.
And you pay a bit of money each year, and you get a plot of land, and you can
I
grow
love it.
flowers on it, and vegetables on it. And the
Yeah,
community gardens are usually open to the public
that's
several
cool.
days a week. And so anyone can go in there and enjoy them. And yes, we New Yorkers, yes, nature, I mean, I won't say it's more precious, but yeah, perhaps I will say it's especially precious to us in that we're in this concrete grid.
Right,
And New Yorkers are famously busy and under a great deal of pressure.
right.
And so, yes, yes,
There's a
my
value
description
that
of
comes from
Central Park.
scarcity. Yeah,
Yes, the scarcity. Yes, exactly. And so I wanted, yes, to convey the importance of Central Park to New Yorkers in particular, who don't have large properties to survey or nearby wildernesses to go to, but they do have that park.
so with the park in particular, you're looking at a stretch of almost 5 years, or maybe over 5 years. When you initially were coming and getting to know the park, were there phases that you went through where there were favorite places? Did they shift? And then today that you've experienced the park so many times, do you have some favorite places, and are they the same places?
Oh, they are my favorite. I'd love to talk about my favorite attractions in the park.
Yeah.
One of them is the carousel, in the
Hmm.
southern end of the park, right in the middle. It's been around. There have been different iterations of the carousel since 1871. There have been
Wow.
4 iterations or avatars of the carousel. And I
Hmm.
see it, I mean, I've ridden it as an adult, and I encourage, in the course of the book, adult play. That
Oh
is,
yeah.
adults having fun without any of their adult inhibitions.
Yes.
And It comes from a Freudian concept I'm big on called regression in service of the ego.
Okay.
Regression means going backward into childhood, and then in service of the ego means that it benefits your surface personality, your
Okay.
day-to-day personality. And so I encourage the presumably adult readers of the book to give way to adult play, and the carousel, yeah, embodies that.
Right.
As it revolves, it sort of spins out the
Whimsical.
light.
Yeah. Right.
It's also the carousel is famous in literature.
Okay.
There are poets in the 19th century like William McGonagall who write about the earliest version, which wasn't in a building, and in fact, it was before electricity, and it was pulled around in a circle, the carousel, by a blind mule in an
Wow.
underground chamber that would answer,
Wow.
yeah, to the tap of the operator's foot. Eventually, the power for it was electrified. It burned
Right.
down in 1924, but it's famous. It appears in the climax of the novel The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger.
Uh-huh.
Holden Caulfield is there with his sister, and she's riding on the carousel, and he's watching like an adult, signifying his acceptance of an adult role.
Hmm.
And it's the first movement out of his great drunken depression. He sees her there reaching for a brass ring. They call it the gold ring in the carousel. And it becomes it's a symbol of hope, and it helps him then take the first step out of his depression. And so, since I was using the park as a recovery for myself from drug addiction and a related serious depression, that scene has always been especially powerful to me.
I love it. I love it. Well, we're running a little shy on time. Unfortunately, as you know, listeners don't have the attention span more than a gnat or two. And so if we go too long, no matter how interesting something is, people tend to fade away. However, I want to make this offer to you that I make to most of my guests, that especially the interesting ones. If you'd ever like to come back and continue this conversation, I would love to do that. Um, Before we get off, though, I have 2 points. Do you have a poem that you'd like to share with us here?
Yes, how much time do we have? I could read.
We can
Um,
go another five,
okay,
maybe 10 minutes,
I'll
but
read.
good 5 minutes.
I'll read the invitation to the reader
Okay,
to come with me and take a tour into the park.
nice.
It'll take about a minute and a half.
Perfect.
The invitation. We struggle, but there's always Central Park, offering water that upholds and bark to lean on. People need its long, lake-flecked recovery, its roots and shoots and birds. Writers, they leave their worlds of words, but Frederick Olmsted, landscape architect, and his ingenious right hand Calvert Vaux left us a good-sized earth as their bequest. The public rectangle runs 50 blocks from north to south, a half mile east to west. I know that head shake, like you're asking why. Why sacrifice Manhattan real estate? America deserved its own Versailles, one not grown only for a potentate. We needed both groomed lanes where a tycoon with coattails could parade his horse and buggy, and lawns where clerks and maids could meet and talk outside their tenements and off the clock. We needed more than bathhouse or saloon. So blueprints, pumps, and shovels turned dank, muggy acreage to a new world paradise that grants asylum where the concrete ends. And yet you've never been there. We've been friends since make-believe back home in yards of yore. I know you too well. Time for some advice. Because you haven't left your office much for years and don't try new things anymore, play hooky. Yes, fake sick. and we'll explore that curious retreat. The sheep and nice and willow trees will get us back in touch with texture. Holidays outside the box are what keep people from the loony bin. I've got it all planned out. 4 days, 4 walks, redressing stress, gloom, burnout, and deflation. 4 days of trails and tales and recreation. 4 days at large. We'll quest beyond time clocks and worldly wages for the Cheshire grin. What do you say? You'll do it? Yay, you're in.
I love it. That was quite an invitation, and it paints quite a picture. And like I said, I might have read through, I don't know, a dozen of your poems, and you paint good pictures with words, and in my rough-hewn language. But I
Thank you
appreciate it.
very
Do you
much.
have a thought that you would like to leave our listeners with that kind of encapsulates this conversation?
I would like to say, since this is a health podcast, that I want to encourage people to reach out and talk to other people. I was in a great state of isolation before I began this project and before I started recovering. And I was arrogant about my misery. I felt it was what made me special, what defined me and singled me out and made me special. And so my ears were closed off to what other people had to say about their troubles. And I thought my troubles were unique to me. And I want to encourage anyone who feels that way, who is closed off in that way, yes, to reach out and listen to others talk about their troubles and to find others who have similar conditions and sympathize with them.
I love that. That's a beautiful message, and it resonates to the message of this podcast, which is about building community focused on health and healthy living. So that's it fits right in with what I'm here to do and what the purpose of all this is. And of course, let's get back to your book. Let's share any contact information you have and how people can find the book, or any other contact that you'd like to share with us.
Got it. Yeah, the book is widely available through all the vendors of books. And so, for example, you can certainly buy it on Amazon. You can buy
Mhm.
it off the shelf in Barnes and Noble, or from any of your favorite any favorite bookseller of yours. My name is Aaron Poochigian, and I am the only one in the world. So if you search my name, the book will definitely pop up along with other work by me. And so it's as simple as that. Just typing my name into Google will give you access to the book and yes, all the rest of my work.
Beautiful. And again, the book is Four Walks in Central Park, a poetic guide to the park. Well, Aaron, it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you coming on to the show. And again, I welcome you to come back and share more of your story with us. I really, I think that these conversations to me are a lot of times the guests will come on and they'll have their pitch points, and sometimes there isn't really much more to talk about. But what I always like to do is meet a new friend and begin a conversation that has a place to continue. So I feel like we're in that spot. Certainly welcome you to come back.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, in the middle, my distraction was my cat started jumping on a paper bag.
I see him
Did you hear
sitting
that?
on a shelf behind you right now.
Yes. Oh, got it. Yes. No, there she is. Yeah, there she is. And so I apologize for the background noise. I had to go and
It's
hush
all
my cat.
good. It's all good. All right.
Okay,
Well, this has
got it.
been
Got it. Thank you very much, Joe.
another view. Yeah, this
I
has
would
been
love to come back.
oh, wonderful. Well, we can schedule that anytime. This has been another episode
Okay.
of the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine. I want to thank our listeners for making the show possible, and we will see you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.